The adoption certificate was sitting on top of the file cabinet when I came home from my mother's funeral, and the date at the bottom was 11 days before my biological mother died. I was 25 years old. I was standing in a stepmother's office I had not been allowed to enter as a teenager, holding a piece of paper I had not known existed, and the woman who had raised me from 16 on was downstairs in the kitchen pouring coffee for the pastor. The certificate was state issued. It bore my name, Hollis Rae Whitaker, changed from Hollis Rae Marin. It listed my adoptive mother as Eleanor Whitaker. The signature line for biological consent was filled in with my mother's name, in my mother's handwriting, and the date underneath that signature was October 4th, 2016. My biological mother died on October 15th, 2016. 11 days. The certificate was filed at the county clerk's office on October 11th. My mother was alive on October 11th. She was in hospice. She was, according to every memory I had of that week, unable to lift a pen. I sat down in Eleanor's office chair, and I held the paper in both hands, and I read the date 3 times, the way you read a thermometer when the number does not match the way the room feels. Welcome to Broken Relations. If you are new here, this is where we tell the long, quiet stories about families who looked one way at the dinner table and another way in the paperwork. Settle in. Drop a comment with where you are watching from. Hit subscribe. Let us begin. My biological mother was named Joanna Marin. She was 38 years old when she died, stage 4 ovarian. She had been a copy editor at a small academic press in our town, the kind of woman who corrected the menu at the diner with a pencil she carried in her purse and apologized while she did it. My father, Dean Marin, had left when I was 4. He sent a card on my birthday for 3 years. Then the card stopped. Then he stopped. My mother and I lived in a 2-bedroom rental on Sycamore Street. The kitchen had yellow tile and a window over the sink that looked at the neighbor's lilac bush. She read to me every night until I was 11, when I told her I could read by myself. And she said, "I know, Hall. I just like the company." We kept reading together until I was 13. She was diagnosed when I was 15. She told me on a Sunday in April, sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea between us. She said the word ovarian, like she was explaining a vocabulary term. She said the word stage 4, like it was a road sign. She did not cry. She told me later, much later, in a letter I would not find for 9 years, that she did not cry because she did not want me to remember her crying. She had a sister, my Aunt Vivian, who lived in Portland. Vivian flew in 3 times during the first year, and then her husband had a stroke and she could not come back. There was nobody else. No grandparents living, no cousins close, no second husband. Just me and her in a small house and a slow disease. That was when Eleanor Whitaker came into our lives. Eleanor was the office administrator at the academic press where my mother worked. She was 44, divorced, no children. She drove a clean silver sedan and wore navy cardigans and had a way of sitting at a kitchen table like she had been invited and was grateful for the chair. She started bringing casseroles when my mother got too tired to cook. She started driving my mother to chemo. She started staying late, then overnight, then most weekends. I liked her. I want to be honest about that part. I liked her because she was steady when my mother was not. And at 16, steady is the thing you cannot manufacture for yourself. She helped me with college applications. She showed up at my track meets when my mother was too weak. She held my mother's hand at the worst of the worst, and she did not flinch. She was, I thought, a friend. The first time Eleanor mentioned adoption was July of 2016. I was 16 and a half. My mother had been on hospice for 2 weeks. We were in the living room, my mother on the couch under a quilt her own mother had made, Eleanor in the armchair with a cup of coffee, me on the floor pretending to do summer reading. Eleanor said, "Joanna, I have been thinking, for Hollis, for the tax piece." My mother turned her head on the pillow. "The tax piece?" "For her education," Eleanor said. "If she is my legal daughter, she qualifies for the in-state at the university where I work, faculty-dependent rate. It is 1/3 of the cost. And the life insurance situation. It would be cleaner." My mother looked at the ceiling for a long time. She said, "Eleanor, I am not dead yet." Eleanor said, I know, I am sorry. I just want to make sure she is taken care of. We can wait." We can wait. I remember those 3 words because nothing about Eleanor's behavior over the next 90 days suggested waiting. I did not understand any of it. I was 16. I was watching my mother die. The word adoption sounded like a paperwork word, like FAFSA or 1099. It sounded like a thing adults handled while you went outside. I went outside. My mother died on October 15th, 2016, at 4:17 in the morning. I was holding her hand. Eleanor was in the chair by the window. The hospice nurse, a woman named Beverly, who had been on overnight rotation for 3 weeks and who I had come to love, stood in the doorway and gave us the room. The funeral was small, 26 people. The pastor read a passage my mother had picked out herself months earlier, written down on a yellow legal pad in handwriting that was already by then a little uneven. Eleanor wore black. I wore black. I shook hands with people from the press and people from our street and a cousin of my mother's I had only met twice. After the service, Eleanor drove me back to the house on Sycamore Street, and we sat at the kitchen table, and she said, "Hollis, you are coming home with me tonight. You are going to live with me from now on. Your mother and I arranged it." I said, "Okay." I was 16. I had nowhere else. We packed a suitcase. We drove to Eleanor's house, a brick colonial on a street called Linden Court, 20 minutes across town. She had set up a bedroom for me, white curtains, a desk under the window, a bookshelf already half full of books I had mentioned liking once in passing. She had put effort in. I cried for 40 minutes that first night, and Eleanor sat on the edge of my bed and rubbed my back and said, "You are home, sweetheart. You are home now." I want to pause here for a second. If you have ever moved into someone else's house at 16 with a garbage bag of clothes and the memory of your mother still on your skin, you know what that first night feels like. It is not gratitude. It is not grief. It is a kind of suspended animation. You are waiting for the next thing to happen because you do not yet have the muscle to make it happen yourself. Drop a comment if that resonates. Subscribe. Let us keep going. The adoption was finalized in March of 2017, 6 months after my mother died. I was 17. I signed papers in a courthouse downtown. Eleanor signed papers. A judge with a kind face said congratulations. I remember thinking the word congratulations did not fit the shape of the room. What I did not know, and what I would not know for 9 years, was that Eleanor had filed the original adoption petition in August of 2016, while my mother was alive, while my mother was on hospice. The petition I signed in March was a continuation of paperwork that had been moving since before my mother could walk to the bathroom unassisted. The certificate I found on Eleanor's file cabinet the day of her funeral, the one dated October 11th, was an emergency certification, a document filed by adults who needed proof of the relationship before the relationship was legally complete. It was the kind of paperwork you generate when you need to prove you are someone's mother for a specific institutional reason and you cannot wait for the regular timeline. I would learn later what that institutional reason was, but on the day I signed in March of 2017, I did not know any of that. I only knew that the woman who had taken care of my mother and now took care of me was, on paper, my mother. I called her Eleanor for 2 weeks afterward, and then she asked me if I would consider Mom. And I said I would try, and within a month, I was calling her Mom, because 17-year-olds are tired, and she had been kind. The years between 17 and 25 were not bad years. I want to say that clearly. Eleanor was a good guardian. She fed me. She paid for my college. She came to my graduation. She gave me a watch on my 21st birthday with my biological mother's initials engraved on the back. She let me keep my mother's quilts and my mother's books and a small wooden box of letters my mother had written me to be opened at various ages. The letters were the only thing I had asked for. There were 7 of them. One for my 18th birthday, one for college graduation, one for the day I got my first apartment, one for the day I got married, if I got married, one for the day I had a child, if I had a child, one for the day I turned 30, and one labeled simply, if you ever feel lost. I had read 4 of them by the time I was 25. 18th birthday, college graduation, first apartment. The graduation one had made me cry in a parking lot for 45 minutes. They were written in my mother's neat copy editor's hand, and they were full of small, ordinary advice. Always pay your bills before you treat yourself. Always call your aunt on her birthday. Always keep a paperback in your bag. They did not feel like a dying woman's last words. They felt like a mother who was planning to be there forever and was simply writing ahead. The 5th letter, the one labeled, if you ever feel lost, was the one I had not opened. Eleanor died in August of 2025. Heart attack. She was 53. She had been at her desk at the university, where she had moved up from administrator to associate dean over the years, and she had stood up to refill her coffee, and she had not made it to the kitchen. A colleague found her. The funeral was the following Saturday. I flew home from the city where I now lived and worked as a paralegal. I had been a paralegal for 2 years. I was studying for the LSAT. Eleanor had been proud of that. She had told me once over Thanksgiving that I had a quiet, careful mind and that I would make a very good lawyer. And I had thanked her, and we had eaten pie. The funeral was on a Saturday. The reception was at the house on Linden Court. The pastor came. Some of Eleanor's colleagues came. A few neighbors. I was the only family. That was when I went upstairs to her office to look for the deed to the house, because the lawyer had asked me to bring it on Monday. Eleanor had a file cabinet in her office, the same one she had used since I was 17. I had never been told not to open it. I had simply never had a reason. Now I needed the deed. The cabinet had 3 drawers. The deed was in the bottom drawer. The middle drawer was personal correspondence. The top drawer was labeled in Eleanor's neat handwriting, Hollis. I opened the top drawer first because, of course I did. The drawer was full. Folders, dividers, dated tabs, school records, medical records, birthday cards I had given her, the certificate for my adoption, the official one, the March 2017 one in a sealed plastic sleeve. And on top of the sleeve, paper-clipped, a second document. This one was older. The paper was a different shade. It was the emergency certification, dated October 11th, 2016, 11 days before my mother died, filed at the county clerk by Eleanor Whitaker, attorney Marcus Pell, file number 16-EC-0884. I sat down in Eleanor's chair. I read it 3 times. The certificate was real. The county seal was real. My mother's signature, the consent line, was real, or was a very good imitation of real. I knew my mother's handwriting the way you know your own face in a mirror. The Joanna in the signature was the right Joanna. The M was the right M. The downward slope at the end, the small loop on the N, all of it was right. But the date was wrong. My mother could not lift a pen on October 11th. I had been there. I had written letters to her cousin for her on October 9th because she could no longer hold the pen herself. I knew her hand was too weak. I knew her eyes were too tired. I knew she slept 18 hours a day by then. I sat in Eleanor's office and I held the paper and I tried to do the math 3 different ways. There was no version where October 4th, the date on the consent line, made sense. By October 4th, my mother was on a morphine drip. She had not signed a check in 3 weeks. The hospice nurse, Beverly, kept her medical paperwork in a binder that she handed to me every Sunday for review. Because even at 16, I was the only adult in the house who could read. I would have known if Eleanor had brought adoption paperwork. I would have remembered. I closed the drawer. I closed the cabinet. I went downstairs. The pastor was standing in the kitchen with a paper plate. 2 of Eleanor's colleagues were on the couch. I smiled at them. I poured coffee. I refilled the tray of cookies. I did not say anything to anyone. Some discoveries are not the kind you announce. Some discoveries you carry quietly down a staircase and into a kitchen full of strangers who think they are mourning, and you stand among them, and you make small talk about the weather, and you wait until everyone has left. I waited until everyone had left. That night, alone in the house on Linden Court, I went back to the file cabinet. I took out every folder in the top drawer. I sat on the floor of Eleanor's office and I read everything. I found the original adoption petition from August 2016. It was filed 2 months before my mother died. 2 months. The attorney was Marcus Pell. The grounds for petition were stated as anticipated guardianship transfer with consent of biological parent. Underneath, in a separate paragraph, was a phrase I had to read 4 times. Petitioner anticipates beneficiary status under Marin Family Trust upon adoption finalization. I had never heard of the Marin Family Trust. I went looking. I went through the rest of the drawer, tax returns, insurance documents, a folder labeled Joanna. Inside the Joanna folder, neatly clipped, were 3 things. The first was a copy of my biological mother's life insurance policy. $200,000, payable to me, Hollis Rae Marin, upon her death. The second was a copy of a trust document I had never seen. The Marin Family Trust, established by Joanna Marin in May of 2016. The trust held 3 assets: the proceeds from the life insurance policy, the equity from the Sycamore Street house, which my mother had owned outright after a small inheritance from her own mother, and a small portfolio of index funds my mother had been quietly building for 15 years. The total value of the trust, as of the most recent statement, was a number I had to look at twice: $2,418,000. The beneficiary was me. The trustee, until my 30th birthday, was Eleanor Whitaker. The third thing was a letter from my mother to Eleanor, dated July 2016, 3 months before my mother died, 3 months before the emergency certificate, 4 months after the trust was established. The letter said in my mother's careful handwriting, "Eleanor, I am writing this so it is in your hands and not just in conversation. Hollis is not to be adopted. I have made arrangements for her to be in your guardianship until 18, then independent. The trust will provide for her. She is to keep her name, her father's name, mine. If you ever raise the question of adoption again, I will revoke your role as guardian. I trust you with my daughter. I do not trust you with her identity. This is not negotiable. Joanna." I sat on the floor of Eleanor's office and I held that letter in my hands, and the room went very quiet. My mother had said no. My mother had put it in writing. My mother had told her best friend, the woman who had been at her bedside, that she did not want her child adopted and that she would revoke guardianship if Eleanor pushed. 3 months later, my mother was too sick to push back, and Eleanor filed an emergency certificate with my mother's signature on the consent line, dated October 4th, 11 days before she died. I sat there. I did not cry. I was reading. I kept reading. The file went on. Communications between Eleanor and Marcus Pell, the attorney. A printed email exchange from September 2016. Eleanor: "Marcus, the timeline is tightening. What is the fastest mechanism for emergency consent if the biological is unable to physically execute?" Marcus: "Eleanor, witness statement plus prior verbal consent under medical duress provision. We need 2 witnesses at the bedside. Recommend timing carefully." 2 witnesses at the bedside. I remembered the 2 witnesses. I had not understood them at the time. Eleanor had brought a notary and a colleague from the press to the house on October 4th. They had gone into my mother's room while I was at the grocery store getting more Ensure. Eleanor had told me when I got back that they had stopped by to pay respects. The colleague had brought flowers. They had been there 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Long enough to witness a signature. Long enough to notarize. I read everything in the drawer that night. I read until 2 in the morning. By the time I closed the last folder, I knew the following things. Eleanor had drafted the adoption petition with Marcus Pell in August of 2016, 2 months after my mother had explicitly written her a letter forbidding it. Eleanor had filed an emergency certificate of adoption on October 11th, 2016, 4 days before my mother died, using a signature dated October 4th. Eleanor had become trustee of the Marin Family Trust upon adoption finalization in March of 2017. As trustee, she had been managing $2.4 million on my behalf since I was 17. I had never been told the trust existed. I sat on the floor and I made a list on a piece of Eleanor's office stationery. The list was short. It said, 1. Find Marcus Pell. 2. Find a copy of the original trust document. 3. Find the 5th letter. The 5th letter. The one labeled, "If you ever feel lost." It was in the wooden box my biological mother had left me. The wooden box was upstairs in the bedroom Eleanor had set up for me when I was 16, the bedroom I had not slept in for 7 years. I went upstairs. I opened the box. The letter was there, cream envelope, my mother's handwriting on the front. Hollis, if you ever feel lost. I held it for a long time. I did not open it that night. I had a feeling that this was the night the letter was for, and a feeling that this was the night I was not yet ready for it. I put the letter in my bag. I went back downstairs. I made tea. I did not sleep. In the morning, I did 3 things. I called the law firm where Marcus Pell had practiced. The receptionist informed me that Mr. Pell had retired in 2022 and was now living in Tucson. She gave me a forwarding number for inquiries related to closed estate matters. I wrote it down. I called my Aunt Vivian in Portland. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her husband had passed in 2021. She lived alone now. We spoke once or twice a year, holidays mostly. I told her what I had found. I told her about the certificate, about the trust, about the letter from my mother forbidding the adoption. There was a silence on the line, a long one. Then Vivian said, "Hollis, your mother told me about the trust. She told me about it the week she set it up." I sat down on the kitchen floor. The yellow tile was the same yellow tile from Sycamore Street. Eleanor had bought a new house in 2018, but she had kept the kitchen tile the same color out of, she said, sentiment. Vivian said, "Your mother wrote to me in May of 2016. She said she had set up a trust for you. She said the trustee was a friend named Eleanor. She said the friend was pressuring her to adopt and she was going to put a stop to it. Hollis, she told me she had written Eleanor a letter forbidding the adoption." "Aunt Vivian," I said, "Eleanor adopted me anyway." The silence on the line was different this time. It was the silence of someone who had been waiting 9 years to say something. "I know," she said. "I knew when you signed the papers in March 2017. Your mother had told me what she wanted. When you sent me the picture of you and Eleanor at the courthouse, I knew something had gone wrong. But you were 17. You were happy. You had a roof over your head. I did not know how to tell a teenager that her dead mother had said no to the only stable adult in her life. I did not know if telling you would help you or break you. I am sorry, Hollis. I have been sorry for 9 years." I did not say anything for a while. "Come to Portland," she said. "Come stay with me for a week. Bring the documents. We will figure out what to do." I told her I would call her back. I made another cup of tea. I sat at the table. The 3rd thing I did was call the firm where I worked as a paralegal and ask for 2 weeks of bereavement leave. My supervisor, a woman named Karen Espino, who had been a litigator for 30 years before she moved into estate work, said yes immediately. Then she said, "Hollis, are you all right?" I said, Karen, I think I need to ask you something off the clock. She said, come to my office tomorrow. Bring everything. The next day was Monday. I drove to Karen's office at 8 in the morning with a banker's box full of folders. I told her the whole story. I showed her the letter from my mother. I showed her the email between Eleanor and Marcus Pell. I showed her the emergency certificate. I showed her the trust document. Karen read for 40 minutes. She did not say anything while she read. When she finished, she took off her glasses and she set them on her desk and she folded her hands. She said, Hollis, I need to ask you a question and I need you to think carefully before you answer. What do you want? I said, I do not know. She said, that is the right answer. Most people sit in this chair and tell me they want revenge or they want money or they want apology. Most of those people are wrong about what they want. I am going to walk you through what is possible, and then I am going to send you home for a week, and you are going to sit with it. She walked me through it. The adoption itself was, on paper, finalized. Adoptions, once finalized, were extraordinarily difficult to reverse. The legal mechanism was called annulment, and it required proof that the adoption was procured through fraud, duress, or material misrepresentation. The emergency certificate I had found was, in Karen's professional judgment, very likely fraudulent. The signature analysis would need an expert, but the timeline alone, combined with the letter from my mother forbidding the adoption, combined with the email exchange between Eleanor and Marcus Pell, was the kind of evidence that made a probate judge uncomfortable. The trust was a separate and bigger problem. As trustee, Eleanor had a fiduciary duty to manage the assets in my interest and to disclose the trust's existence to me upon my reaching the age of majority, which was 18. She had not done that. For 7 years, from my 18th birthday until her death, she had managed $2.4 million on my behalf without ever telling me the money existed. Karen said, Hollis, in 7 years of trusteeship without disclosure, there are a number of things she could have done. She could have managed it cleanly and just delayed telling you, which is unethical but not actionable in a major way. Or she could have used the trust assets in ways that were not in your interest. We need to look at the trust's accounting. I said, how do I do that? She said, you file a petition for accounting with the probate court. As successor beneficiary, now that the trustee is deceased, you are entitled to a full accounting back to the trust's establishment. You will see every transaction Eleanor made on your behalf, every distribution, every fee, every transfer. I said, will it tell me if she stole? Karen said, it will tell you everything. She gave me a list. Find Marcus Pell. Get a forensic handwriting analysis of the consent signature. File the petition for accounting. Do not contact Marcus Pell directly. Do not speak to Eleanor's attorney without representation. Hire her for the case at her firm's standard rate. I said, Karen, I work for you. She said, then I am hiring myself out at 50 cents a year and a cup of coffee. Sit down. We are doing this properly. I cried in her office for about 3 minutes. She handed me a tissue. She said, your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman, Hollis. She set up a trust on a small income while she was dying, and she put a stop in writing to a friend who was overstepping. She did everything she could to protect you. The fact that the protections did not hold is not on her. It is on Eleanor. I want to pause here for a second. If you have ever found out that someone you loved, someone you called mom, someone who came to your graduation, did something to you that you did not know was being done, and you do not know how to be angry yet because the grief is still in the way, then you know what those days felt like. Drop a comment if any of this is hitting close. Subscribe if you have not. The next part is where it gets quieter and harder. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to Tucson. Marcus Pell had agreed to meet with me. I had written him a letter on my own stationery, not Karen's, explaining who I was and what I had found. I had not threatened him. I had simply said I had questions and that I was going to file paperwork either way, and I thought it might be in his interest to talk to me first. He responded within 4 days. He invited me to his home in Tucson. He said, "I have been waiting for this letter for 9 years." His house was a small adobe on a quiet street with Palo Verde trees in the yard. He was 71, he had thinning gray hair, and he wore a soft cardigan even in the Arizona heat. He served me iced tea in a glass with a slice of lemon, and we sat on his back porch, and he talked for 2 hours. He said, "I knew it was wrong. I knew it the day I drafted the petition." Eleanor came to me in August of 2016, and she had a story about a dying friend and a teenage daughter, and she had a copy of a verbal consent that she said had been given. She said the friend had agreed to the adoption months earlier. She said the friend was now too sick to physically execute, and they needed an emergency mechanism. I asked for written corroboration. She brought me a notarized affidavit signed by herself attesting to the verbal consent. She brought a witness, her colleague from the press. I should not have accepted it. He looked at his hands. I had been Marcus Pell for 38 years at that point. I had drafted 1,000 adoption petitions. Most of them were straightforward. The ones that were not straightforward, I usually sent back. With Eleanor, I did not send it back, and I have lived with that for 9 years. She told me later, after the adoption was finalized, that there was a trust involved. I had not known about the trust at the time of the petition. If I had known, I would have refused. Adoption with an undisclosed financial interest is not something I would have touched. He paused. When I learned about the trust in 2017, after the adoption was final, I told Eleanor that I would not represent her further in any matter related to your guardianship. I told her she should disclose the trust to you when you turned 18. She told me she would. Clearly, she did not. After that, I retired 5 years later, and I tried not to think about it, and now you are here, and I am glad you are here. I asked him if he would put any of this in writing. He said, "Hollis, I will give you a sworn declaration. I will testify if you need me to. I am 71. I have nothing left to lose except my conscience, and I have been losing that piece by piece for 9 years. Use me however you need." I flew home with a sworn declaration in my carry-on. The forensic handwriting analyst was a woman named Dr. Lena Mawu. She had been certified for 26 years. She testified regularly in state and federal court. Karen had recommended her. I sent her the consent signature and 3 samples of my mother's handwriting from earlier in 2016, before the disease had taken her hand. I sent her samples of my mother's writing from October 2016, when I had been writing letters for her because she could no longer hold a pen. Dr. Mawu took 11 days to complete her analysis. she sent her report to Karen. Karen called me into her office. The signature on the consent line was a forgery. Not a forgery in the sense of someone making up a signature from scratch, which is what most forgeries are. It was a traced forgery. Dr. Mawu identified light pencil indentations on the original document, suggesting that someone had placed a copy of my mother's authentic signature behind the consent form and traced over it with ink. The pen pressure was uniform in a way no genuine signature ever is. The traced forgery was, in Dr. Mawu's professional opinion, executed by someone other than Joanna Marin. Karen said, "Hollis, this, combined with Marcus Pell's declaration, combined with your mother's letter, combined with the timeline, this is an annulment case. This is also probably a criminal case if you wanted it to be, but the criminal defendant is dead, so that is moot. But the adoption itself, we can annul. Posthumously." I asked her what posthumously meant in this context. She said it means we go to the probate judge and we petition for annulment of the adoption based on fraudulent procurement. If the judge grants it, the adoption is voided as if it had never happened. You revert to your birth name. The trustee designation Eleanor held becomes void retroactively. The trust does not change beneficiaries because you were always the beneficiary. But the chain of fiduciary breach becomes much cleaner. I said, "Karen, what do I want?" She said, "You have been asking yourself that question for 3 weeks. What is your answer?" I said, "I want my mother back." She said, "I know." We sat with that for a minute. Then I said, "I want my name back. I want the trust accounting. I want to know what she did with my mother's money. And I want the truth on a piece of paper somewhere with a court seal on it so that nobody who comes after me ever has to wonder if I made it up." Karen wrote it down. The petition for accounting was filed first. It moved fastest because Eleanor's estate had no contestants other than me. Her own attorney, a man named Christopher Ide, was cooperative once he understood the situation. He was a probate attorney who had not known about the Marin family trust until I told him about it. He had been hired by Eleanor only to handle her own personal estate, which was modest, the house on Linden Court and a retirement account totaling about $300,000. The Marin family trust had been administered separately, and Christopher Ide had not known it existed. He said on the phone, "Ms. Marin, I will be honest with you. I think Eleanor was a complicated woman. I think she did some things she was not proud of. I am cooperating with you fully. I have her files. They are yours." The trust accounting took 6 weeks to compile. The trust company that had held the assets, a small fiduciary firm in our state, produced a complete record of every transaction since the trust was established in May 2016. The numbers told a story. For the first 18 months, Eleanor managed the trust cleanly. She invested conservatively. She took the standard trustee fee, which was reasonable. Returns were modest but steady. In 2018, 2 things changed. The first was that Eleanor took out a loan against the trust to purchase the house on Linden Court. The trust was the collateral. The loan was for $340,000. The trust documents allowed for trustee discretion in investment decisions, and a real estate purchase could, in theory, have qualified, but the house was not held in the trust's name. It was held in Eleanor's personal name. The trust held a lien against it. This was, Karen said, gray. Not clearly illegal, but not clean. The second thing was that Eleanor's salary at the university stopped covering her lifestyle. She was promoted to associate dean in 2019, but the cost of living in our area went up faster than her salary. She started taking what the accounting referred to as advance distributions from the trust. These were small at first, $3,000 here, $5,000 there, then $10,000, then $20,000. By 2024, the year before she died, Eleanor had taken just over $400,000 in advance distributions from the trust over 6 years. None of them had been disclosed to me. None of them had been authorized by anything in the trust document, which specified that distributions to anyone other than the named beneficiary required either the beneficiary's written consent or a court order. I had given no consent. There was no court order. The trust was now worth $1.7 million instead of the $2.4 million it should have been worth, before factoring in the $700,000 in growth it would have seen over those years if the assets had remained invested. I sat with that number for a long time. Karen said, "Hollis, this is not a small theft. This is a sustained, deliberate, undisclosed fiduciary breach. Eleanor essentially used the trust as a personal line of credit for 6 years. She owes the trust the $400,000 she took. Her estate owes it. The house on Linden Court and the retirement account, that is roughly $600,000 in assets. We can recover." I said, "Karen, do I want to recover from her estate?" Karen said, "Hollis, you are the only beneficiary. The estate has no other heirs. If you do not recover, the money sits in probate and goes nowhere. If you recover, it returns to the trust, which is yours." I said, "I know that. I am asking a different question." Karen said, "I know what you are asking. You are asking if it is right to take her house. The answer is that the house was never hers. She bought it with your money, the money your mother left you. Taking it back is not vengeance. It is restoration." I went home and sat with the fifth letter for a long time. I had still not opened it. I opened it the night before the annulment hearing. The hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday in October 11th, as it happened, 9 years to the day since the emergency certificate was filed. I do not believe in symmetry generally, but Karen had said, "Hollis, the court schedules what it schedules. Take it however you take it." I took it. The night before, I sat at the kitchen table in my apartment in the city. I had moved out of Eleanor's house months earlier. I had been living in a small one-bedroom near my office. The kitchen had a window that looked at a parking lot. There was no lilac bush. There was no yellow tile. But it was mine, and it was quiet, and it was where I did most of my thinking. I opened the envelope. My mother's handwriting was on the front. "Hollis, if you ever feel lost." The letter inside was 3 pages. "Hollis, my love, if you are reading this, you are in a hard place. I am sorry I am not there. I want you to know a few things. First, you are loved. You have always been loved. Whatever you are facing, the love does not change. Second, you are smart. You have been smart since you were 3. I trust your mind. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. You do not need anyone's permission to trust yourself. Third, there is a folder in my filing cabinet at the house on Sycamore Street. It is labeled Insurance. Inside the folder is a key. The key opens a safe deposit box at First Federal on Main Street. I have left documents there, things I wanted to keep separate from the regular paperwork. Eleanor knows about the trust. I told her about it because I had to. I do not know what kind of person she will turn out to be, Hollis. I have hoped for the best. I have prepared for less. The safe deposit box is for less. Aunt Vivian has the second key. If something feels wrong, you and Vivian open the box together. Fourth and last. Your name is Hollis Rae Marin. That is the name I gave you. Whatever else changes, that name is yours. Nobody can take it from you. Some people will try. Hold on to it. I love you, Mom. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I called Aunt Vivian at 6 a.m. her time. She answered immediately. I read her the letter. She started crying and did not stop for a long time. She said, Hollis, I have had the second key in my dresser drawer for 9 years. I never knew what it was for. Your mother gave it to me when I flew out to see her in June 2016. She told me to keep it safe. She said you would tell me when it was time. I said, it is time. Can you come to the city? We are going to the bank. The hearing was at 2 p.m. Vivian flew in that morning. We met at the airport. We drove to Sycamore Street. The house had been sold years ago. New owners, a young couple. I knocked. I told them briefly what I needed. The husband, a man named Ahmed, looked at me for a moment and said, Come in. The basement still has the old filing cabinet. We never moved it. We use it for tools. He led us downstairs. The cabinet was the same metal cabinet from my childhood. I knew exactly which drawer. The folder labeled Insurance was still there. Inside, taped to the back of the folder, was a small brass key. Ahmed stood in the doorway of the basement and watched us with the gentle expression of a stranger who understood, without being told, that something was happening that he was not part of. He said, Take whatever you need. I took the key. We thanked him. We drove to First Federal. The bank manager was a woman in her 50s named Patricia. She looked at the 2 keys and the death certificate of my mother and Aunt Vivian's identification, and she walked us into the vault. Box 412. The same number as the room where the woman in the second story I had heard about somewhere had spent her hospital days, which I noticed only because I notice numbers now. Inside the box were 3 things: a second copy of the trust document in case the first one was destroyed or contested, a sealed envelope addressed to me, marked for when you find this, and a small velvet pouch containing my mother's wedding ring, which she had told me when I was 12 that she had lost. She had lied. She had put it in the safe deposit box for me, and she had told me she lost it because she did not want me to know where it was if anything happened to her before she could explain. I opened the sealed envelope in Patricia's office. It was a single page. Hollis, if you are reading this with Vivian, the trust is in danger. Eleanor has been pressuring me. I have written her a letter forbidding adoption. I have set up the trust independently. I have made provisions. But if this letter is in your hands, the provisions did not hold. I have given Vivian power of attorney over my estate that activates upon my death, and only if you are not the legal child of Eleanor Whitaker as of your 18th birthday. If you are reading this, the adoption happened anyway, which means we need to undo it. Vivian knows what to do. I love you. Be calm. Be patient. Win quietly. Mom. Vivian said, "Power of attorney over the estate. Hollis, that means I can speak for your mother in the annulment hearing today." I said, "Aunt Vivian, you are coming to court with me." We went to court. The hearing was, on paper, simple. Karen presented the evidence, the forged signature, Marcus Pell's sworn declaration, which he had signed in front of a notary in Tucson and overnighted to her, my mother's letter forbidding the adoption, the email between Eleanor and Marcus, the trust accounting showing the $400,000 in undisclosed distributions, Vivian's power of attorney, activated by my mother's foresight 9 years ago. The probate judge, a woman named Helena Ortiz, listened for an hour. She asked careful questions. She asked Marcus Pell's declaration to be read into the record. She asked Vivian to confirm the power of attorney. She asked me to confirm that I was petitioning of my own free will and with full understanding of the consequences. I confirmed it. Judge Ortiz took a 15-minute recess. She came back. She read her ruling from a yellow legal pad in handwriting that looked for a moment like my mother's, although it was not. She granted the petition. The adoption was annulled retroactively to the date of the emergency certificate. My legal name was restored to Hollis Rae Marin. The trustee designation that Eleanor had held was voided, effective from the date of the original adoption finalization. Eleanor's estate was found liable for the $400,000 in undisclosed distributions plus reasonable interest. The house on Linden Court was ordered to be sold and the proceeds returned to the trust. Karen squeezed my arm. Vivian squeezed my hand. I did not cry in the courtroom. I cried in the parking lot. Vivian held me. She said, "Your mother just won, Hollis. Your mother just won the case she filed 9 years ago." I want to slow down here for a second. If you have ever stood in a parking lot and cried because somebody who has been gone a long time finally got their say, drop a comment. Tell me their name. I read every comment. Some stories take 9 years to finish. Some stories take longer. The point is that they finish, and the people who waited get to be there for the ending. Subscribe if you have not. The last part is where it gets quiet. The house on Linden Court sold in February. A young family bought it. They had 2 kids and a small dog. I gave them the bedroom set Eleanor had bought for me when I was 16. I told them it was a good room. The proceeds went back to the trust. The retirement account went back to the trust. The $400,000 Eleanor had taken came back in a sense, although you do not really get money back. You just get a different number on a statement. The trust, restored, was worth $2.3 million. Not quite what it would have been, but close. I did not touch it. I did not know what to do with it yet. I kept paying my rent in the city out of my paralegal salary. I kept studying for the LSAT. I took the test in March. I scored 171. I applied to law schools. I was accepted to 4. I chose the one closest to Aunt Vivian, Portland. I moved in August. Vivian helped me unpack. Her apartment was small. Mine was smaller. The kitchen had a window that looked at a maple tree. I bought a small lilac bush in a pot and put it on the fire escape. Karen called me on my first day of law school. She said, "Hollis, are you in a building with a courtroom feeling to it?" I said, "I am in the lecture hall." She said, "Good. I want you to remember something. The reason your mother won was not because she was angry. The reason your mother won was because she wrote things down. Write things down, Hollis. Every law you learn, every case you read, write it down. The paperwork outlives us." I wrote it down. I am 26 now. I'm in my second year. I keep my biological mother's letters in a box on my desk. I keep my biological mother's wedding ring on a chain around my neck. I keep the 7th letter, the one from my 30th birthday, sealed in the box. I have 4 years to wait. I am content to wait. Sometimes I think about Eleanor. I do not know what she thought she was doing. I do not know if she believed in some compartment of her mind that she had been a good mother to me, that the $400,000 was a fair price for her years of care. I do not know if she ever read the letter my mother wrote her in July of 2016 and felt anything at all. I do not need to know. The court has spoken. The paperwork is filed. My name is my mother's name again. A house belongs to whoever keeps it standing. A name belongs to whoever the mother gave it to. My mother gave me my name. My mother set up a trust she could barely afford on a copy editor's salary. My mother wrote a letter forbidding an adoption. My mother gave a key to her sister and said, "Hold this. She will know when." She knew. She always knew. She had been the kind of woman who corrected the menu at the diner with a pencil, and she corrected the future for her daughter the same way, quietly, carefully, with a paper trail. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment with a name, the name of someone who quietly protected you, someone who saw something coming before you did, someone who left you a key. I read every comment. I carry every name. If you want to hear the next story about the aunt who waited 9 years to tell me the truth and what she put in writing the night I came back to her with my mother's last letter, the link is in the description. Thank you for being here. Stay close. The next one is waiting.